God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call, please.
Please note for the record that all council members are present.
Okay, adoption of the agenda. I have a second? Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, we got a working agenda, and City Attorney, you have something to report out from closed session?
Yes, Mayor, council met in closed session to discuss with the real property negotiator, Mr. Holstein, concerning a potential license agreement for a lot owned by the city of Brisbane located at 3501 Bayshore Boulevard in Brisbane. And council did give direction to bring that license agreement forward to the council, presumably at the next council meeting.
All right, very good. That brings us to oral communications number 1. I have one slip. Michelle? I'll just give you a full name for the record, Michelle.
Michelle Salmon, Brisbane resident. Is this on?
Mhm.
Okay. I have a problem with this and city funds being used for what I consider to be not strictly factual. I've read this thoroughly, and a lot of it is speculative, it's opinions, and it's slanted. And I think that this is a misappropriation of public funds in an election, and I'm very unhappy with it. For example, in question number 3, it says, what happens next if the voters do not approve Measure JJ? The first sentence is correct. If Measure JJ does not pass, the City Council will need to consider further whether to approve, deny, or modify the property owner's current application for development of the Baylands. However, the next 4.5 paragraphs is speculation, speculative and slanted. And I think that that is really a misuse of public funds in a civic matter and a civic measure election. So I'm pretty unhappy about that, and I'm just stating it here because I have a list of questions that haven't been answered, and they're not on here. I'm happy to read them to you, or I can give them to you for you to answer at your leisure, whichever you prefer.
You can give them to the city clerk and then.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions that aren't being answered, and they're not being answered in this, and this is a very slanted piece that was distributed to the entire town and with public funds, and I think it was wrong. Thank you.
City Attorney, you care to comment on that?
Briefly, Mayor and Council, certainly the city is able to spend public funds for purposes of information and education. We feel that the questions and the answers do that, and they do not advocate a particular position with respect to Measure JJ. So we feel that it does comply with what the requirements are concerning information and education to the community about the measure.
I think it's important to note that the council didn't have anything in this, right? So, okay. Anybody else wish to address the council on anything that is not on the agenda? Okay, Michelle.
So who did write it? If the council didn't write it, obviously I know you didn't write it.
At the city staff wrote it with our consultants. At the last council meeting, it was granted it was late at the council meeting, but I did make a public statement that we would be doing this, we would be putting this in on our website, and that we would be putting it in the Star. So that's what we did. In the council, on advice of city attorney, was not involved in the drafting of the questions or or obviously any of the answers to that. So this is entirely a staff project or process. So your complaint is really with me.
Yes, and it is. Okay. And I have a very serious complaint about it. And I know other people do too. And some people have already contacted the Fair Political Practices Commission about it. So I do think it is, I'm sorry to disagree with you, Michael. Usually I do agree with you, but in this case, I don't. I think this is a very slanted piece towards passing Measure JJ. It does not, when one thing is the fact and the answer to the question, and then 5 paragraphs are supposition that isn't even fact yet, I think that's wrong, and I think it's very slanted, and I'm sorry that the city of Brisbane put this out in that manner.
Okay, anybody else wish to address the council on anything not on the agenda? Okay, not seeing any hands, we're going to move forward. We have a presentation. We have a commendation to Ryan Chung, Eagle Scout candidate. So Noreen?
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and council members. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Ryan Chung. Earlier this year, Ryan, an Eagle Scout candidate, approached the Parks and Recreation Department regarding his desire to complete his Eagle Scout project in Brisbane. The purpose of the project, in Eagle Project, is to plan, develop, and give leadership to others through a project that benefits the community. Together with staff, he identified the park behind the library and community center as an ideal project. The park was formally dedicated to the City of Brisbane in 2014 following the efforts of dedicated volunteers and Councilmember Cliff Lentz. Over the past several years, the mesh netting underneath the decomposed granite in high-traffic areas began to surface, which created a tripping hazard for park goers. In addition, the landscaped areas required some updating, weeding, and new vegetation. As a result, Ryan strategized for months with staff from Parks and Recreation as well as Public Works and San Bruno Mountain Watch to organize his improvement project and outline the scope of work. Ryan organized several youth volunteers from Troop 17 to support him through the project and chose a sunny weekend in August to complete the work. With Ryan's leadership, the troop removed the problematic mesh netting from walkways, replaced the decomposed granite, cleared the park of debris and weeds, and worked with San Bruno Mountain Watch to incorporate many native plants from Mission Blue Nursery into the landscaping. So tonight, it's my honor to introduce you to Ryan Chung, and I believe the mayor has a commendation to share with you.
Yeah. Well, congratulations, Ryan. Thank you so much for your hard work. Looks like you brought a couple of your Eagle Scout mates. If you guys want to come forward and stand with Ryan, that would be great while I read this commendation. Okay. And we got our Eagle Scout master here also, so why don't you come on up, sir? All right, this is a commendation on behalf of the City of Brisbane on this date, October 4th, 2018. I commend Ryan Chung for his completing a volunteer community project as an Eagle Scout candidate that involved improving and beautifying the park behind the Brisbane Library and Community Center. Thanks to your leadership, initiative, and coordination with the City of Brisbane, San Bruno Mountain Watch, and Eagle Scout Troop 17, you helped create a newly improved park and community space that community members will enjoy for many years to come. So Ryan, come on up and get this. And I'll give you a big hand. Thank you. All right. Keep up the good work. And it looks like your friends there got some leadership to follow. Yeah, very good. Thank you so much. Okay, that brings us to the City of Brisbane Vedettes. Hi, Johnson. How are you? Good.
Good morning. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council members. I'm Caroline Chung, your Senior Management Analyst, where a large segment of my role under Stuart Drillinger is managing city communications and public engagement, which includes the Star newsletter, the city's website, social media, with the help of a team of individuals comprised of all city departments, and this Channel 27 broadcast live stream from the city's website or on-demand video that you are currently watching. Video is actually one of the communication tools that I've always wanted to utilize more of, knowing full well it's what drives eyeballs these days. And this summer, I was grateful for the opportunity to do just that. Johnson Shao is a recent graduate of San Francisco State University and holds a degree in cinema. He brought a level of professionalism to the videos we released, and you will see from the views in the vignette that they were highly noticed and engaged many. Internally, it was also very rewarding to hear from departments' ideas for future videos. However, we couldn't fulfill all of those requests by the time summer concluded. Snippets of the videos we were able to complete, though, have been edited by Johnson into the vignette, which will soon be played, with the full-length videos of each available to watch on our website, brisbanec.org. I know everyone involved in the process of making the videos really enjoyed the experience, which Johnson largely helped with by taking the first stab at a script, coaching those on camera, having done some acting himself in the past, and always working hard to make sure the final product was perfect, even if it meant going up to edit number 8, 9, or 10. I now would like to invite Johnson up to the podium to share with you his take on working in Brisbane this summer, what he's learned, and who inspires him. Johnson.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. My name is Johnson Shao, and I was a summer multimedia intern for City of Brisbane. Excuse me. The following videos are a summary of what I did this summer. It has been a truly rewarding experience. I have learned so much about local government, and it's something that I never thought I would have the opportunity to experience. It was a bit of a challenge at first because it isn't what I learned in school, making videos for informing the public versus solely for entertainment purposes. But I think we did a pretty good job combining the two. My ultimate goal is to be able to reach or surpass who I believe to be one of the greatest directors of our generation, Mr. Christopher Nolan. Some of his most notable works include the Christian Bale Batmans and Inception. Having the opportunity to speak with Brisbane independent filmmaker Keith Moreau only motivated me more to achieve my goals, while also reaffirming my understanding that something as ambitious as reaching Christopher Nolan is going to take time, skill, passion, persistence, and a bit of luck. I believe in constant learning, and in my short time working with Caroline, I've seen how these videos that I had the opportunity to produce engage the community, and hopefully they learn something as well after watching them. The following 4-minute video summary is what transpired this summer. Thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the vignettes.
Welcome to Brisbane, also known as the City of Stars. We're the northernmost city in San Mateo County. We're located just south of San Francisco. Brisbane is also home to Silver Spot. Silver Spot's our co-op, nursery, and preschool for our youngest residents. They love it here.
To the City of Brisbane. Do you ever wonder how the city works? When was the last time you used the restroom, did the dishes, or water your garden? None of this would be possible without the hard work of the City of Brisbane utility team. We work endlessly to make sure that we are providing residents and visitors.
The City of Brisbane Sewer Department is responsible for the safe and efficient conveyance of all types of wastewater. The first is storm drains. This system collects stormwater runoff from our streets whenever it rains.
The City of Brisbane Public Works Department is responsible for the reduction and eventual elimination of publicly generated litter in our waterways. These devices, installed mostly inside our storm drain catch basins, provide an efficient means of capturing trash.
The City of Brisbane's Water Department is responsible for the delivery of safe and reliable drinking water to its customers. A status of Brisbane's current water quality can be found by clicking on the water quality status bar on the homepage of the city's website.
May 21st to the 27th, 2018, as Public Work Week.
We hope you've enjoyed the Power of Public Works videos produced during National Public Works Week to help our citizens understand many of the activities that go on out of sight.
This pavement method consists of a trade of construction vehicles that grind the existing asphalt, size that material for reuse, inject binder additives, and then place the recycled material back into the roadway it just came from, while maximizing the effectiveness of gas tax revenue received from Senate Bill 1 and other sources.
The City of Brisbane Parks and Recreation Department, in conjunction with the Public Works Department, manages
provide an efficient means of capturing trash.
The City of Brisbane's Water Department is responsible for the delivery of safe and reliable drinking water to its customers. A status of Brisbane's current water quality can be found by clicking on the water quality status bar on the homepage of the city's website.
May 21st to the 27th, 2018, as Public Work Week.
We hope you've enjoyed the Power of Public Works videos produced during National Public Works Week to help our citizens understand many of the activities that go on out of sight.
This pavement method consists of a trade of construction vehicles that grind the existing asphalt, size that material for reuse, inject binder additives, and then place the recycled material back into the roadway it just came from, while maximizing the effectiveness of gas tax revenue received from Senate Bill 1 and other sources.
The City of Brisbane Parks and Recreation Department, in conjunction with the Public Works Department, manages
Sorry, the show got cut short, but you get an idea of what Johnson's capable of. And if you have any questions for him, he's here. And
the rest of the vignettes are, or the rest of the videos are on the website, right? So if people are interested,
yeah,
they can go see like the full.
Yes, all the videos are on the website and social media too.
Yeah, Johnson, I actually had the pleasure of viewing the whole thing before, and you did a great job, so thank you so much, you know. And
thank you.
I think you're going to have a lot of success in the film business and whatever path you choose, so thank you. All right.
Yeah.
Give me a hand. Okay, that'll bring us to item C, which is a declaration. So declaring October 7th to the 13th, 2018 as Fire Prevention Week. And this, of course, is when we have our most fires, especially here in the Bay Area, the most dangerous ones. And so we have Inspector Clyde Preston here to receive this proclamation. I'm going to read it. So it's a proclamation of the City of Brisbane declaring October 17th to the 13th, 2018 as Fire Prevention Week, whereas the City of Brisbane, California and North County Fire Authority are committed to ensuring the safety and security of all those living and visiting in Brisbane. And whereas fire is a serious public safety concern, both locally and nationally, and homes are the locations where people are at greatest risk from fire. And whereas home fires killed 2,735 people in the United States in 2016, according to the National Fire Protection Association, and fire departments in the United States responded to 352,000 home fires. And whereas the majority of U.S. fire deaths, 4 out of 5, occur at home each year. And whereas the fire death rate per 1,000 home fires reported to the U.S. fire departments was 10% higher in 2016 than in 1980. And whereas Brisbane residents should identify places in their home where fires can start and eliminate those hazards. Whereas working smoke alarms cut the risk of dying in reported home fires in half. Whereas Brisbane residents should install smoke alarms in sleeping room outside each separate sleeping area and on every level of the home. And whereas Brisbane residents should listen for the sound of the smoke alarm, and when it sounds, respond by going outside immediately to a designated meeting place. Whereas Brisbane residents who have planned and practiced a home fire escape plan are more prepared and will therefore be more likely to survive a fire. And whereas Brisbane first responders are dedicated to reducing the occurrence of home fires and home fire injuries through prevention and protection education. And whereas Brisbane residents are responsive to public education measures and are able to take action to increase their safety from fire, especially in their homes. And whereas 2018 Fire Prevention Week theme, look, listen, learn, be aware, fire can happen anywhere, effectively serves to remind us that we need to take personal steps to increase our fire safety. So therefore, We resolve. Clyde, thank you so much for coming here. So actually, maybe add in there when people should change their batteries on their smoke alarms. You got a tip on that?
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, for declaring Fire Prevention Week here in the city of Brisbane and helping us raise awareness in the public. This kicks off our month of activities. Actually, this week we got a little head start. I know it starts officially, it's next week, but our Brisbane firefighters were out at Littman Middle School and Brisbane Elementary School this past week, meeting with all the children and trying to get across all these important fire safety messages to our children here in Brisbane. Not this Saturday, but the next Saturday, the 13th, will be our annual Fire Service Day open houses for North County Fire Authority. And Brisbane Fire Station 81 will be open 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. On the 13th. That's the second Saturday of the month. Talking about the smoke alarms in people's homes, one of the advancements we have now is with the laws have been passed where, years ago we used to say change your clocks, change your batteries, and try to promote everybody to change their batteries once a year. The new law prohibits the sale of the 9-volt battery ones. They all have to be the 10-year battery smoke alarms. So the advantage of that is when people put those in, they should have a battery that lasts at least 10 years. So we don't have to worry about people pulling batteries out or having to worry about changing them, which is a good advantage. So we encourage everybody, if your smoke alarm is over 10 years old or you still have the old 9-volt battery ones, they're a little more expensive, but to go get those upgraded, and now you don't have to worry about getting up on the ladder once a year. And I know in Brisbane, a lot of the homes here are multi-story. Some of the manufacturers actually make the battery-operated smoke alarms where they are remotely wired together. What I mean by that is, it's like you set a code on each one of the detectors, so when one rings off, it rings them off in the entire house wirelessly. It transmits a signal to each one. Those are a little more expensive, but it's the advantage of is if one goes off on the bottom floor and you're on the third floor of your house, all of them start ringing off. So the technology keeps getting better and better out there. So those are at major hardware stores and things like that. So we encourage everybody to upgrade your detectors, go to the 10-year battery, and don't forget about the carbon monoxide alarms as well too, which are also required.
Great. Well, thank you, Clyde. Does anybody have any questions for Clyde? Nope.
No, but
Thank
I
you.
will say,
Yeah.
we had a fire at our house recently, dryer fire, and if it was not for the smoke alarm, we would have been in big trouble. And also, my mom took the CERT program, and we had a fire extinguisher, and that ended up really saving our house from having so much damage. So, it was one of those things that you never think is going to happen until it does, and then you think you're lucky stars that you were prepared. So we learned the hard way, but thankfully that technology exists, and we had absolutely no damage to our house other than just the dryer that needed to go anyway. So can't say enough about being prepared so that those things are there when you need it.
Absolutely, and thank you for recognizing that. I'm sorry that happened to you, but
And the Brisbane Fire Department was very fast. We had already put it out, but they came, they helped us relocate that dryer to someplace safe. But so thank you so much for everything that you do, and we hope to not have to use you, but when we do, you guys are professional and fast, and we thank you for that.
I appreciate those compliments. It means a lot to us here at North County, and prevention is the key. And we encourage everybody here in Brisbane to come to the open houses, learn about what we have, and also take part in our city's CERT program. It's an outstanding program, and it's taught right here in Brisbane, so it's wonderful.
Highly recommend it.
Right.
Thanks, Clyde.
Thank you.
Thanks, Clyde.
Okay, that brings us to the consent calendar. So, what's council's pleasure on this? Any items you want to remove, or?
I'd make a motion to approve item A, B, C, D, E, F, and G.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Don't think no further discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. That brings us to old business. Item A, history subcommittee presentation.
Yes. Mayor, Council, this is an item that we're bringing before you. When you adopted the budget in June, you had approved $50,000 for the History Committee. You had asked at that time for the History Committee to come back and let you know what the expenditures were going to be on. There were 3 items within the budget. One was for the video project of the video history. One was for hiring a person to assist with the video project as well as assist with the archives and other things that would be needed. And then the third was the digitization of the printed material within the archive itself, the big one being the Brisbane Bee. Since that time, the History Committee has met a couple of times to discuss the projects. The History Committee is working with the filmmaker Keith Moreau in town to do the video project. Keith has offered to loan the city the necessary video equipment, which at the time when we did the budget presentation, we were thinking we might need to rent or buy video equipment, but Keith has graciously offered to loan us the equipment that we would need for this, to do it, and he's looking at providing us 4K video equipment so that we will have the highest technology available at this time to do that. He will also do editing for us for free, which is something that when we contacted other video people said that they would charge us for the editing of the information. Also, Keith would work with us to get the video transcribed, which is if you're trying to do a search for the information of the videos, you need it transcribed so it can be put on the web so you can do a search in that fashion. What Keith is asking for, and that we'll work with our city attorney, is what are the rights that Keith will retain from the videos, and what are the rights that the city will retain with the videos. What we will be using the videos for is more for video archive for our history. So we're looking at having an ability to have it up on the web, have people be able to search it, be able to search the transcripts, so that way somebody who's doing a research project can do that. Keith would probably be looking at it to do documentaries, which would be a very different style than what we are looking for. We had looked at having multiple people do videos for us. The challenge with it is, as if you have different video people doing it, different filmmakers, then you get into an issue about who owns the rights for which videos and how are you going to be able to put all that together. So having the History Committee thought having a single filmmaker do it would be in our best interest. So that was the first area. So whereas we thought we were going to need to spend about $10,000 on that, we really probably need to spend maybe about $1,500 for some of the ancillary kinds of stuff like green screens or the stuff to make sure that we can soundproof the room. We're going to be using one of the rooms within City Hall. So, and we're expecting that this project is going to take 2+ years to complete, and probably even that is an overestimate of that, because as we go through this, we keep getting new names added to our list. And I've given you a list of the names that we have to this point in time, but since I printed that list, I know I've got 3 or 4 more names that have been suggested. So we see this as an ongoing project, so we're looking forward to that. The next area of expenditures that we were looking at was the digitization of something like the Brisbane Bee. When we got a quote for that, it was about $10,000. The issue with digitization is you want to make sure that it is, once again, being able to be searched on the web and have it go through a OCR. I've provided a little bit of information about optical character recognition in the staff report. If you want me to go more in depth, I can do the best I can. Keith is here. He could probably help me a little bit more on that. But really, when you start talking about having something that can be read easily, you need to have it have the right level of contrast. You need it, especially with some of our older material, like the Brisbane Bee. The contrast on that is not quite what you would really need in today's society that you would be expecting. It's not as black and white that you would get, so you need to have a little bit higher quality material to do that. However, we're not quite sure what we need to do at this point, so we're holding off, because the library system has gone through a process where they're looking at assisting all of the cities that have within their system on digitization. So we're not quite sure what they're going to be doing and what they're going to help us with. So until they can come back to us, we are going to hold off on doing any digitization to make sure that we're being efficient and that we're using the resources available to us as best as we can. So we're not going to be looking to digitize anything at this point in time, and we're waiting for that to come back. The third area is hiring a person to help us with all of this. the issues that we would face, and as I wrote in the staff report, that as we go through the video project, for every hour of video, we would anticipate at least 5 hours of additional staff work. That staff work is working with the working with Keith and working with the history committee to set up the interviews, working with whoever is going to be the interviewer to make sure we have good questions. So having some pre-time with the interviewee to do that. Also, after the transcripts are done, going through the transcripts, because no transcript is perfect, to make sure that we actually have what is said transcribed correctly. So if you're going to have an hour worth of a video, you're going to need to go through that go through that video more than an hour to make sure you have your transcript correct. And also working with Keith and working with the interviewee to make sure that if there's any material that we want to have edited into it, so if somebody's talking about an aspect, a picture that they have or something, that we can have that flow seamlessly. And in order to do that, we need to know exactly at what moment in time in the video we need to do that, so Keith can edit it in properly and get that. In addition to that, we also have our archive room where we keep getting people giving us material, so we need somebody who can assess that into the city properly. So we're expecting, as I said in the staff report, that we're looking, probably somewhere between 400 to 500 hours for the video project and maybe another couple of hundred hours a year for the general archive room. And then as we get closer to the finishing of the library, this person will also help with the displays in the history room at the library. So this is going to be a person that we're probably going to have for a few years. We have a archive assistant on our pay schedule right now. We would anticipate it being about the same. I've looked at other cities and they have this kind of a position, and the range of $31 to $38 an hour is similar to what they're paying other employees like this. So we'd anticipate this, depending on the number of hours, between $19,000 to $27,000 for the year, and this would be an hourly rate, an hourly job, so we would be paying it based on the hours that they actually work, not based on a contract. So we're beginning to draft that staff report, that position. We've looked at other cities, and we are working through that. So at this point in time, we don't think we're going to be spending the full $50,000 as we had anticipated, but we think we're going to be spending closer to $40,000 to $40,000. This is an area where the history committee is very anxious and excited to go forward, especially with the video project, since, as you know, no one is getting younger. So they want to make sure that we can get some of the people who are at the older side of our residents to be videoed as quickly as we possibly can. And I would say that, but you also never know on the younger side what might happen. So we're very interested in trying to get 20 to 30 people at least a year through the process so we can start collecting and having this information be available. So with that, if there's any questions.
Council questions? Anybody?
Sounds good.
Oh,
Sounds good.
okay.
Too.
Keith, thank you. Thank you very much for your volunteerism and donation of your equipment, man. Really appreciate going above and beyond there. So I was hoping your other colleagues on the history subcommittee or history committee were going to be here tonight, but I guess they left you hanging out by yourself on to answer all the technical questions if we had any. But thank you so much. So
They're gearing up to be at the Day in the Park on Saturday.
Pardon me?
They're gearing up to be in Day in the Park for Saturday, so if we will have a booth there.
So council's pleasure on this. Do we need to take an action, I guess?
Since you told staff to hold off spending money until after we made the presentation, I think just an action to say that we can release the $50,000 so we can start moving forward with what we need to do.
Okay, so somebody want to make a motion to do that? Just
I would make that motion to reapportion the money to be spent as deemed needed.
Second.
Okay, motion and second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. Opposed? No. Nobody. Okay. Stuart, thank you so much for that. Okay, that brings us to staff reports, which is item A, which is city manager's report on upcoming activities.
So we are rebooted to give you the Brisbane vignettes in total. So I'm going to turn it over to Caroline.
Yeah, we just wanted to show you the rest of it just because Johnson has some family here too today, and
Yeah, we're talking
Yeah, let's
on that.
let's see the whole
yeah,
thing.
okay, just where we left off. Okay, so here we go. Rental facilities.
The City of Brisbane Parks and Recreation Department, in conjunction with the Public Works Department, manages a number of facilities that can be rented for your next special event. The community pool is another popular spot in town, located at 2 Solano Avenue. You will have access to the gazebo areas, PA system for music, and of course lifeguard supervision.
Just toss it in the recycle bin. It's fine. They sort through it anyway. But you can't recycle that. Why would you think I want landfills all over me? When the recycling company has to sort it for you, it means more staff and higher costs.
Don't you think it's weird to separate paper from bottles and cans when they can end up in the same place?
Yeah.
Wrong! Paper stays clean and more marketable, and processing costs are kept down.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed our tour and walk around in Brisbane. We're 10 minutes from the airport, 15 minutes from the city of San Francisco. It's a great place to live, work, and play. For more information, visit our website, brisbaneca.org. Thanks so much.
All right. Very good. Okay, now we'll do city manager's report on upcoming activities.
Or we'll watch it again.
Okay, that was it. Way to go. Okay, next. No.
I don't have nearly the level of automation that you just saw. So, city manager's report. On Saturday is the annual day in the park. It starts at 8 a.m. with the Derby at San Francisco and Old County. At 10 a.m. will be the official event will begin. 11 o'clock will be the dog costume contest. 12 o'clock the announcing of Derby race winners. 12:40 the pie eating contest, and 1:15 to 3 will be live music, which will include R&B, soul, Motown, and rock. As indicated earlier by Clyde, the Fire Service Day is Saturday, October 13th, so it's a week from this Saturday. It'll be from 10 to 2 at Fire Station 81 on Bayshore Boulevard. Station tours, firefighters demonstrations, specialized equipment display, activities for kids and adults. Everyone is welcome to that. And then on Sunday, and I've always wondered how this actually works, but there's the
Same.
underwater pumpkin patch at the pool from 1 to 3 p.m. Entrance fee is $5. Pumpkins will range from $2 to $20 based on size, and there will be fun seasonal games and races for children of all ages. One other item that's not on here, I've got a couple of inquiries this week from council members on our street sweeping program, and I appreciate the input that I got from the council. We have had some recent issues with our provider. We contract with the City of South San Francisco. There's been some breakdowns of their equipment, so we are working with them on that. I know there is an issue with coordination of potential ticketing for cars that are parked in areas that are designated for street sweeping, and then we don't do the street sweeping, and that gets a little bit awkward. So we're trying to work on that coordination. So I will get back to you as soon as I have more information, but we are fully aware that there is a deficiency in that service at the moment, and we are working with our contractor.
Great. One thing, if I may, on your previous slide, you did not announce that it was also going to be the Volunteer of the Year award.
Oh, yeah.
I don't have that on there. That's
You missed that on your
Yeah.
slide.
There will be the Volunteer of the Year award. I'm not sure what time that gets announced, but
11:45.
11:45. Okay.
I know that because I'm.
You're you were told to be there then. Okay.
Yeah. 9 a.m. Saturday.
Yeah.
No, 9 a.m.
Oh, and then at 9 a.m. on Saturday at Madhouse Coffee, Senator Jerry Hill and Mayor Conway, I think we're dubbing this Derby Day Coffee.
Derby Day Coffee.
With the mayor and the state senator. The public is invited to come and to meet and ask questions of the state senator. So that will be this coming Saturday at 9 a.m. So now I'm going to turn it over to the city attorney, who has some follow-up on some additional questions that we've been asked, and this information will be on our website, as well as we, I think, have handouts for the public to look at tonight.
Mayor and Council, as the community and the Council is aware, the city has had on its website now a number of questions and responses concerning Measure J in an attempt to inform and educate the community about this important measure that the Council has put on the November ballot. But in addition to the 12 questions that are currently on there now, the 11 questions that are on there now, we've received or been aware of some other questions that the community members have raised. And so in an effort to address those questions and put them on our website, we will be doing that tomorrow. But as a preview tonight, we're going to walk through those questions. Unfortunately, some of the answers are a little lengthy, and I apologize in advance for their length, but it's necessary sometimes to go into some depth about the answers just to make sure that the information is informative, is educational, and is correct. So, for example, question 12 asks, if Measure JJ is approved by the voters and UPC elects not to modify its specific plan application in order to be consistent with Measure J as approved by the voters, what will happen next? And the answer to that is, if that were to occur, the City Council would then consider whether to deny those pending applications, because those applications would no longer be consistent with Measure JJ. Readers will also be referred to question 2, because question 2 also asks about what happens if the measure does not pass. Another question that's come up from time to time asks about if the Measure JJ passes and the council subsequently approves a specific plan and a development agreement for the property, and thereafter the property would be sold, does that somehow invalidate that specific plan or invalidate the development agreement? And will new property owners be able to build more housing than what has been approved by the voters in Measure JJ? And the answer there is that specific plans and development agreements run with the land, meaning that they stay with the land, and any subsequent purchaser of the property or any portions of the property that are subject to that specific plan or that development agreement would be covered by the terms and conditions of the specific plan and the development agreement. And to modify the range of residential units that the voters would have approved in Measure JJ would take a subsequent vote of Brisbane voters who would have to approve that the same way that Measure JJ would be approved by a majority. Certainly in the press recently, there's been a certain amount of interest in a recently passed legislation concerning what is called the city's regional housing needs allocation, RHNA, R-H-N-A. And the question has been raised is if the development of Baylands, if development occurs on the Baylands, and will that vastly increase the city's RHNA, since such development would have an effect on the jobs to housing balance. And unfortunately, that question cannot be answered definitively at this time. We know from history that the RHNA methodology differs in each of the city's housing element cycles, resulting in highly variable RHNA numbers. For example, in the city's last two housing cycles, the city's RHNA number changed from 480 in one cycle to 83 in the next. The fact that this piece of legislation, SB 828, has now been signed into law, that will likely influence the RHNA methodology for the next housing element for the city, which will be in 2022. Certainly, we would anticipate that jobs housing balance factors will remain factors in determining the city's RHNA, but it is not the only factor, and nor should it assume that it will be the most heavily weighted factor in the future. In the past, when RHNA has been developed for the city, the methodology has looked at both existing jobs and housing rather than planned jobs and housing, and then ABAG, which is the county government, the facility, excuse me, the agency which determines the city's RHNA, has made its own projections as to employment and housing. We don't assume there will be any different with the approval of Measure JJ. There's been some discussion about whether the city might be able to get some kind of exemption if Measure JJ were approved. And if that were to occur, when would that exemption come into effect? For example, would it occur before housing is actually built or only after the property has been developed? Again, the answer to that is not certain, but it would seem to us that the purpose of any RHNA exemption would be to recognize that the city has allowed the possibility of residential development that over time could double the population of the city, and that practically speaking, there is very limited capacity for additional residential development within the city. Now another question has been asked is, now that SB 828 has been signed into law, will it suddenly have an impact on Brisbane if Measure JJ is approved by the voters? Our analysis of this legislation, SB 828, concludes that there will be no direct impact to the city if Measure JJ is approved. Brisbane, like all other cities and counties in California, will ultimately be affected by SB 828 because the terms of the bill influences the methodology for RHNA. But until that methodology has been determined, and most likely until courts weigh in on that determination, how SB 828 will affect Brisbane cannot be known at this time. Another question that's been asked is, how will traffic generated by Baylands development be mitigated? In other words, if Measure JJ passes and the Baylands is developed consistent with that, how will traffic generated by that development be mitigated? The Council will recall that the environmental impact report prepared for the Baylands illustrates the difficulties faced in mitigating all the traffic impacts. One of the major challenges is that both San Mateo County and the City and County of San Francisco and regionally are experiencing growth from existing residences and businesses, and it's anticipated that future growth is likely to occur. That cumulative growth will result in additional congestion on major highways and roadways in the vicinity and also regionally, which are already over capacity. The EIR demonstrates that many highway segments and street intersections in the areas around here will be subject to increased travel times, even if nothing is built on the Baylands. Therefore, adding new trips to the Baylands will certainly exacerbate a future traffic situation already expected to be more challenging than today. While Baylands development is not going to solve all of the traffic problems in the region, there are a number of steps that the EIR identifies that would be necessary to be taken to reduce the project's traffic impacts. One of the first and important measures is to limit the number of trips generated by the project. Locating housing, jobs, and transit in close proximity to each other are demonstrated to reduce single occupancy car trips. Incorporating into the project design itself will promote walkability, biking, shuttles, transit, and other alternative modes of transportation, because these are also important factors in getting people out of their cars. Additionally, the development project will need to prepare what are called transportation demand management plans, which will outline specific measures to be implemented to reduce the number of car trips. Certainly, while project vehicle trips will be reduced, they will not be eliminated, and the project itself will be required to construct roadway and intersection improvements to accommodate the traffic generated by the project, including the improvement of intersections and roadways outside the project limits. Some of these roadways and intersections are outside Brisbane city limits, and the implementation of these improvements will require the cooperation of affected cities. Finally, the Baylands will have to contribute fair share funding to other regional transportation improvements, including but not limited to the Geneva Avenue extension, Candlestick Highway 101 interchange, and the bus rapid transit to the Balboa BART station. As I mentioned, these questions and answers will be on the city's website under the frequently asked questions. And as other questions come in that staff feels are important enough to add to our frequently asked questions to inform and educate the community, those questions and answers will be posted as well. I'll be glad to answer any follow-up questions to these questions if the council has any at the moment. Thanks.
Okay. Council have any questions?
I just have one, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
So Michael, on question number 12, if you can go back to that. You gave an option what the council might do. Could a potential option be that the city moves forward with its own specific plan? Is that a possibility if UPC did not want to accept the requirements of Measure JJ?
Certainly, that nothing would prohibit the council from directing that a specific plan consistent with Measure JJ be developed and brought back to council for consideration.
Okay. And I do have one other one, Mr. Mayor. Number 17, Michael, in regards to traffic and transportation. Did the EIR analyze a multimodal station where all the different modes of transportation would come to one location and potentially perhaps moving the station?
I'll defer to Mr. Squickie on that.
It did consider a multimodal facility at proximity to the current Bayshore station. There wasn't a lot of, in the analysis, from the range of where it was being considered, sort of at Geneva or north of Geneva, wasn't considered to appreciably alter its sort of capacity or ability to reduce travel trips. So I did look at a bit of the range, but from Geneva and northbound was kind of considered to be the same capture area of trips.
So, John, if we move forward with the general plan amendment and then we start to work on the specific plan, we could go back to some of these transportation issues and reevaluate them.
Oh, certainly. You'd have to be looking at a traffic analysis that looked at this parameters of JJ's general plan language, and you could plug in whatever kind of improvements if that's something the council wants to consider as part of that.
All right, great, thank you.
I have a follow-up question.
Madison, go ahead.
Yeah. Were you finished?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mine's on number 12 also. So I've kind of heard some similar questions like this from the community. So just to clarify, UPC doesn't need to be on board with this GPA. This is a decision that the city council is making that will be either approved or denied by the voters. And should that be approved going forward, if UPC decides to sell the land to another developer, that doesn't mean that then we go back to the negotiating table. The 1,800 to 2,200 units remains fixed, regardless of if the land is sold to somebody else, and regardless of if it's sold to multiple different new owners, if the land is cut up in different parcels and sold. The only thing that affects the 1,800 to 2,200 number would be a vote by the people of Brisbane to increase or decrease that number, I presume, or B, the passing of legislation at the state, the state level that would impact that number. So regardless, UPC does not need to agree to this GPA. It is a decision that the city of Brisbane and the citizens are making. What we talk about agreeing to something, that's at the specific plan and development agreement level, correct?
Correct. UPC does not have to be in favor of or in accord with the general plan amendment. That's a decision that the community will make.
Right. But we do come to the table together when we talk about the specifics of the plan, which would be specific plan and development agreement. But
Certainly,
at this level.
Yeah, if UPC decides that it will modify its specific plan to be consistent with the general plan amendment, should the voters approve that, yes, then there will be discussion about whether what is proposed is substantially in compliance with that amendment, and the council will make that decision. And certainly with respect to the development agreement, that would be something that would have to be agreed upon both by the property owner and by the city council in order for that to be approved.
Right.
Any other questions? Terry?
I have one question. On your question number 17, you talked about traffic mitigation, and we all know that all projects in the area are contributing to traffic and congestion. But your wording was a little vague, and I want to make sure I understand it correctly. While some mitigation would be needed off-site, off Brisbane site, that mitigation would require cooperation from other cities, but we can't force that cooperation to happen. So I just want to make sure that while it says it would require cooperation, we can't force that issue. We can ask for it, but we can't force it.
That's an accurate statement.
Great, thank you.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Erin.
My question is actually a little bit more general relative to ABAG and MTC. There is some information going around the community that ABAG and MTC can actually change the number of houses. Could you just clarify that, please?
Neither of those organizations has land use control concerning the residential, what would be allowed on the property with respect to the number of units. Certainly those agencies can and have adopted plans that assume or contemplate the kinds and the type and the number of housing in the communities that they affect. And that's their considered opinion. As the council knows, that the city has been on record with respect to disagreeing with some of those assumptions in those plans, but they do not control the the number of units that would be allowed on any property within the city of Brisbane.
Thank you.
To follow up on that, if I may?
Yeah, go ahead.
When ABAG and MTC do their planned Bay Area and their RENA allocations, they do it in a citywide manner where they may assign a certain number of units to Brisbane, and then it's up to Brisbane to plan accordingly to find where those units may fit. So while it may be obvious to say, oh, they should go on the Baylands, it would be up to the city to decide where we wanted to allocate those units and make a decision for us where it makes sense or it's possible to put those units, depending on the allocation.
That, again, is an accurate statement.
And a follow-up. So, for example, let's say we got 400 units, and the council felt like that should go on the Baylands. That, again, would need to go to a vote of the people, and the people would need to decide, because that would have to be another GPA, correct? Would the people need to decide whether that is something, if it's beyond the 20, if there are 2,200 units already in existence there, and our RENA allocation is 400 units, and we believe the 400 units would be best suited on the Baylands, would that be something that then the voters would need to affirm and say, we are willing to allow 400 units to go there?
Well, let's assume then that the city's other RENA allocation has already accommodated the 18 to 2,200 units. So if your question is, at that point, if there was an additional 400 units, and if the council decided that those 400 units would be best placed on the Baylands, then yes, that would take a further vote of the people in order to accommodate that.
Okay, any other questions?
No.
No.
I got one follow-up, Mr.
Okay.
Mayor. So, in regards to the Plan Bay Area 2040, so currently it acknowledges 4,400 units. There's a process, I guess, every couple of years where it gets updated. So if Measure JJ was to pass, and we have 1,800 to 2,200 units being allowed out in the Baylands as part of our general plan, then there's the possibility of changing that number in that plan, because now you have a real number as opposed to the kind of made-up number that they come up with.
Correct. You would assume that those agencies would take that into consideration in adopting any revisions to those plans.
Okay, thank you.
But that would just be an assumption. We don't know. That would be a negotiation point, and another agency may feel that we can absorb those in our acres or on the Levinson property or at the Sierra Point or wherever. So that's an ongoing negotiation with ABAG and MTC to keep our allocation at a reasonable amount compared to our land use and our current general plan. Correct?
You've hit the trifecta again. Correct statement.
Thank you.
One more. Sorry, I'll make it real quick. This is written in the GPA, but I think it's really important for the public to understand that if a developer comes forward with a project that qualifies for a density bonus, for putting in above and beyond the low-income housing that is required. Typically, projects, if the developer includes more low-income housing, they can get a density bonus where they can get more units. With this specific project, 1,800 to 2,200 units encapsulates any potential density bonuses, correct? So if there were, 35% of the units were, or additional amount of the units, 50% were low income, they couldn't get more units over the 2,200 because of including that added amount of low income housing in their plan.
That is the way the general plan amendment is written. It provides that the 2,200 includes any kind of density bonus that might be provided under state law.
Okay.
Anything else?
Just kidding.
Okay, that's going to take us on to item B, which is legislative, state legislature update. So, Tom, you and Delilah have this.
Yes. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. Thank you for inviting us to address the Council on the two-year session that just ended August 31st of the legislature. We're going to touch on basically three things. We'll give you an overview of what just happened as Governor Brown finished his last signing bill period. We'll talk, Delilah will talk about specific bills of interest that we've had a lot of questions about in Brisbane, and then we'll touch on a couple of the races for office on the November ballot that we've been asked to. There'll only be a couple touched on. By operation of the Constitution, the legislative session, the two-year legislative session from 2016 to 2018 adjourned on August 31st at midnight. Technically, there are ways to get around that, but it adjourned at midnight, August 31st. The governor had through September 30th to act on legislation, sign it, veto it, or not sign it, and if he doesn't sign it, it's not a pocket veto, it actually becomes law. Governor Brown, and no governor that I can remember in recent history, has not signed or vetoed. Governor Brown in September signed a total of 1,016 bills. He vetoed 201. That's out of over 3,000 bills that could have gotten to his desk. It all depends on if you count back for 2 years, and then it's over 5,000 bills. The legislature continued to take on tough issues this year. It focused on consumer privacy. First in the nation, consumer privacy law was passed that is somewhat modeled on an EU privacy measure. It's the California Consumer Protection Act, I believe. Legislature also took on near the end of session the wildfires, including response as well as mitigation measures, and they addressed criminal justice reforms in cooperation with Governor Brown. Housing, as expected, continued to be an issue that received a lot of attention from the legislature. 2017 was perhaps the year of housing, but just as expected, it continued in 2018, and we expect it to again continue in 2019 and beyond because of the affordability crisis and the shortage of houses generally. The housing bills this year took on different approaches than the housing package did last year. They looked at incentivizing housing development. They looked at adding accountability for housing targets, which is one of the bills we'll touch on. And there were a few bills that looked at streamlining certain kinds of housing developments, another bill that we'll take a look at. With that, I will ask my colleague Delilah Clay to talk about SB 828, AB 2923, and an important teaser, SB 827, which was put on inactive this year, but is expected back when the new two-year session is gavelled in December of this year, and that will be the 2018 to 2020 session, but the bill is expected to come back.
Good evening. So SB 828 was authored by Senator Scott Wiener. It's a policy-intensive bill that tries to specify additional factors to be taken into account to the regional housing methodology. The bill targets the interaction between the state authority, that is the California Housing and Community Development Agency, and the regional authorities, so the Council of Governments. In Brisbane, that would be ABAG and to some extent CCAG of San Mateo. So the bill adds additional factors to be taken into consideration, things like the percentage of households in the region that are overcrowded, the vacancy rate for the region, and consideration of what a healthy vacancy, what the vacancy rate is for a healthy market, the percentage of cost-burdened households. It also considers things such as the jobs-housing relationship in the region and the availability of land that's suitable for development. So as Michael touched upon earlier, SB 828 is one of those bills that, because it tinkers with the methodology process, it's really unclear as to how it's going to impact any individual jurisdiction. Brisbane is obviously included in that. It's still a very important bill because it does adjust the RENA process for everybody across the state. And so it's one of those things that from a, sort of regulatory perspective, the city is going to have to continue to keep an eye on to really have a better understanding of how it specifically may or may not impact Brisbane. Another bill that got a lot of attention this year, and I think is very important, is AB 2923, which was authored by Assemblymember David Chu. The bill provides streamlined approval processes for eligible transit-oriented development projects on BART-owned properties. So it requires BART to adopt new transit-oriented development zoning standards for each of its stations, and that includes setting minimum height, density, parking requirements, floor ratio requirements, things of that nature. In addition, it requires the local governments that are impacted by those stations to also adopt conforming zoning standards. The bill, as it relates to Brisbane doesn't have a BART station, and we don't believe there are any plans to do anything like that here anytime soon. But what's important about this bill is it is sort of a marker to indicate the type of things that the legislature is considering. This bill makes dramatic changes to traditional land use decision-making in the state. So it's a very important bill and something that I think is sort of foreshadowing some other things that the legislature may or may not consider in addressing the state's housing and affordability crisis. Another bill that Tom briefly mentioned was SB 827. It was also a bill authored by Senator Wiener this year. That bill didn't make it to the governor's desk. Mr. Wiener chose to withdraw the bill, but it's our understanding that that bill may come back in some form or fashion next year or in subsequent years. That is another bill that looks to incentivize and streamline development of transit-oriented housing and provide exemptions from things like density controls, parking requirements, height limitations, and things of that nature that the local governments may or may not want to institute. So again, going back to the idea of bills that are coming out of the legislature or being considered in the legislature that adjust the traditional relationship of land use decision-making.
The reason I asked that we address 827 is because there's two reasons. SB 35, which passed last year, and AB 2923, which passed and was signed this year. If you'd asked a group of legislators in 2016 whether a bill like AB 2923 could become law, I am quite certain that a majority of the legislature would have said, not a chance. In terms of, especially under Governor Brown, by the way, if you had asked legislators the same question in 2015, 2016 about SB 35 last year, same answer. In fact, SB 35 was repeatedly declared dead by insiders, and it was never really dead. For Brisbane, SB 35 doesn't apply. for Brisbane, AB 2923 does not apply. There's an argument, I guess, someday if they ever do actually extend the rail, but that it doesn't apply now and it doesn't apply in the foreseeable future. 827 is a different ballgame for Brisbane, and the reason that we wanted to focus on it is that again, the insiders, and this isn't partisan, this is just talking to people who've been around the legislature a long time, and we're talking about policy people who work in the legislature. They thought 827 was dead on arrival. There was nothing to really pursue. And what we witnessed was Mr. Weiner took a lot of heat for the bill. He agreed to make modest changes. He then pulled the bill. And the bill that others thought would then die next in line would be 2923. And as Delilah pointed out, it not only didn't die, it was negotiated and it moved along at a fairly steady clip for such a controversial bill. In its first year of serious consideration, also a change. Usually it takes 3 years to pass something like that. And Governor Brown signed it, which is unusual for a variety of reasons. So that marker, we think, is telling for the continued interest of the legislature in having changes in state housing policy become more important or primary or overrule some local land use controls. And 827, whatever number it's assigned next year, whatever form it comes back, will be further reaching than SB 35. It will be further reaching than 2923 in terms of impinging on longstanding local land use controls. So we wanted to highlight the trend, and we'll see what other bills come. I'm sure there will be others, but those are the three that really jumped out at a whole lot of people.
I have a few follow-up questions.
Go ahead.
Can you give just a brief synopsis on what 827 would have done?
Sure. So 827 would have provided what he calls in the bill transit-rich development bonuses to eligible properties. And those bonuses would, again, exempt the developments that were within a half-mile of major transit hubs from things like density controls, parking regulations, maximum height limitations. So the goal of the bill is really to incentivize building around transit stops, large buildings, higher density, things of that nature. I think ultimately with the goal of having people use those transit stops more regularly, but that's the way the bill is essentially structured. Gets a lot more complicated, but that's generally how it works.
Okay, so I have a follow-up to that. So let's say 827 comes back and it applies to Brisbane, specifically the Baylands. Aside from litigating that to protect ourselves, would the only other way to ensure that a bill like that wouldn't apply to us would be to have a development agreement already in place?
That is, I'll see what if Michael and I agree. Short answer, Mr. Weiner has spoken about a prospective policy. So just like SB 35, if there is a project that is materially far along in the process, it will be exempt. Now, SB 35 doesn't apply to development of the Baylands, as I mentioned previously, for a variety of reasons. It's not just whether there's a plan before the council. 827, in whatever number it comes back as, is supposed to be changed somewhat dramatically. And we will see whether or not Mr. Weiner includes that prospective view or not. If he does include the prospective view, which was very contentious when he introduced 827, I don't know that you'll need a development agreement. I think you'll need a demonstrable project that is moving along in the process to be exempt. But that's speculation based on what he's done before in negotiating a contentious bill related to housing. Nobody really, well, he knows, none of us know exactly what he's going to come back with.
I didn't necessarily mean that. I kind of use this as an example because it's like a bill that we're familiar with that probably would have applied to us. But I was just speaking, kind of using that as an example, but speaking a little bit more generally, like if there is a bill that comes out, whoever authors it, that specifically does apply to the Baylands, you were looking at most likely litigation in order to, be able to protect Brisbane from additional development or potentially a development agreement, but it sounds like
The state has limited, there's three answers. The state has limited ability, very limited ability to interfere with an existing contract, which is why you mentioned a development plan. It can, eminent domain, et cetera, but it's limited ability. Two, the state has an interest in, if housing is moving along, the legislature has been very clear that it does not want to interfere with housing that's moving forward. It wants to focus on those who are not moving forward with housing projects because it wants to expedite solutions to the housing affordability crisis. What moving along means remains to be seen. And then you have the contractual question, and I know Michael leaned in before. I know I've already said my view about the development agreement is a bright line, but there's a question about whether or not a bill would apply before, or a bill would exempt, Brisbane would be exempt before a development agreement is signed, and I wonder if Michael sees the gray area too or not.
No, I think that's, I would agree with that analysis. In the absence of a development agreement, we would hope that the legislation in question would reflect the fact that if there is a process that has, has some shape to it, that it's not just speculation, that then a city that has that would be exempt from that provision. And under that circumstance, if, for example, Measure JJ had passed, we would certainly argue that there was such a process in place. We would probably even argue that even if it didn't pass, the fact that we had applications pending before us, it would not apply as well. But those are all, as as Tom indicated, those are speculative situations. And ideally, if we can get to the point where you have a development agreement, that would provide probably the best protection for legislative interference.
Okay, and then final question. I know you've answered this question until you're blue in the face, so it'll be easy for you, I imagine. You touched on SB 35, and that's really still something that I think that many people are kind of confused about when it applies and when it doesn't. And currently, it doesn't apply for a variety of reasons, but one of the main ones being because of the toxic nature of the site. Many people are concerned that if the site is then remediated and housing is approved there, that all of a sudden that'll trigger SB 35. Can you speak to why, if the site is cleaned up and approved for housing, why SB 35 may still not apply?
Because the structure of the Measure JJ, but also the structure of the current proposal by UPC, which was addressed in one of the new questions, I think 12, if I'm not mistaken, there is a pending application. The assumption is that application will be acted on in accordance with JJ's terms, and UPC has sat at the table and talked about that already, if JJ passes. If JJ fails, UPC has the ability to withdraw its proposal and make an argument that it is under SB 35. Our response to that would be no. It's a hazardous waste. It has hazardous waste. It's a hazardous waste site for a variety of reasons. So we're exempt from 35. We would also argue that there are no objective zoning standards because guess what? Measure JJ just went down. But the problem is the only way to actually know legally that you're locked into something that the state will not interfere with is if you have an actual contract, a development agreement. And that's ultimately, that's the best solution we can come up with to keep local control for Brisbane. And that's been the focus.
So if, let's say that they wanted to enact SB 35 and Measure JJ was passed and the land was cleaned up, would that only apply if the project then consisted of 50% affordable units?
If Measure JJ passes or fails, if it fails, we have absolutely no guarantees, and we have decades of showing that the landowner has been unwilling to clean up the land, to pay the price to clean up the land. There have been indications they don't have the resources to clean up the land. So you're out of 35 under that basis. If Measure JJ passes and we move forward with a negotiation to a development agreement, that development agreement is what will document the remediation standards, and they will be in a contract, so you will be exempt from SB 35. So under either scenario, you're exempt from SB 35. The difference is, the big difference is, things like 827 and others that we don't know what's coming along, we can't be sure we're out of unless we have a project pretty well along.
Right, okay.
Any other question? Council question?
No.
Cliff?
You had briefly talked about SB 828. If you could just elaborate a little bit more on that.
Sure. So you want to know more about the factors that the bill takes into account?
Yeah, I mean, how that could potentially impact the Baylands development.
Again, in terms of the potential impact on any particular jurisdiction, 828 is really, really difficult to try and speculate. Again, it takes into account on a regional basis things like the vacancy rate, overcrowding, questions about whether or not the percentage of households that are cost burdened, that means using more than 30% of their income on housing costs, right? So it looks at these things on a regional scale and then requires the state agency to take those things into account as it's developing its numbers that it then sends down to the regional agencies. And then the regional agencies are going to make some other decisions based on, again, 828 adds additional factors to things that they have to take into account. Again, overcrowding, the availability of suitable land for development in any particular jurisdiction before it then doles out those numbers to the jurisdictions within its sort of umbrella, right? So ABAG has a number of jurisdictions in the Bay Area that it allocates housing numbers to, its RENA allocations to. It's just really difficult, given that multi-layered process and all of the factors that are in play at each level of that process, to say how it's going to impact the Baylands. I don't know if anybody else, I know John looked at it and some other folks did too, but we really can't anticipate the impact.
I'd like to add a couple points. A good citizen of Brisbane, I understand, I saw part of the analysis, and it was a phenomenal, thoughtful snapshot. If 828 passes and all things being as they are, X leads to Y, leads to Z, we can extrapolate out to A, B, and C. And that citizen may very well be right. That citizen may very well be wrong. The problem with 828 is no one can be sure. And one of the biggest problems is we can't trust that what is X and Y and Z now, for the reasons Ms. Clay suggested, definitions are changing. Who's deciding what things mean are changing. That impacts numbers. So we can't count on what X, Y, and Z currently mean, continuing to mean those things. But the second point I would emphasize is this. Whether Governor Brown was going to sign 828 and 2023 came down to two really hot button issues in Sacramento, just inside baseball. 828, he signaled it in advance, and then he signaled it when he signed it. He expects it to be challenged in court, and he doesn't know that it is defensible or legal. But there's a housing crisis, so let's see what happens. So he basically said, I'm going to sign this in a good faith effort to see if I can move the process along, but I have no confidence that a court will uphold it. We understand why he said that. We don't quarrel with his decision to sign or not sign, but it just gives you a sense of how up in the air everybody is about what it ultimately will mean. On 2923, Mr. Chu negotiated very, very hard to get to a point where he not only could get it out of the Senate, but that the governor would consider it. He made a lot of concessions. And that was one of the hardest worked bills of the year by an author. And he succeeded, and he got it off the Senate floor, and he got a governor's signature. But that was no accident. It's because of concessions and changes and arguments, et cetera, et cetera.
But again, 828 is about RENA. It's not about land specifically. So if 828 does have teeth and we do get units, the city council still determines where those units go. And if we want to put them on the Baylands, that still goes to a vote of the people.
Two answers to that. The short answer is yes on both. Two things. General plan amendment allows 18 to 2,200 houses in a specific area, housing units in a specific area. If anything happens that says, in order to get to that number, you have to go outside that area, it's a vote of the people. Okay, you can't, the city council doesn't get to overrule a vote of the people, so you have to go back to the people. So that's point one. Point two is the way RENA ultimately works and the way we think it will continue to ultimately work, no matter what the numbers are, is it's going to be based on looking at what a city's available land for development is. And Brisbane has, after the Baylands, has pretty significant limitations. So you're right in assuming that, yes, it comes back to the council, and it's going to be a really tough call on how you would address a new number, et cetera. There is, I'll just editorialize because we said it months ago, somebody asked us if there would ever be an exemption to RENA for Brisbane for doubling the size of the city if Measure JJ passes and there's a development agreement and it actually gets built, et cetera, et cetera. You can ask Senator Hill on Saturday morning if you happen to see him, but there is a sensitivity by Senator Hill. There's a sensitivity by other lawmakers in the area that Brisbane, Mountain View stepped up. They're trying to do something to address the crisis. As you've probably noticed, there's a little less sympathy for what happened in Cupertino and a lot less sympathy for what's not happening in Lafayette. So there may be a RENA exemption possibility, which would solve the 828 problem and the lack of clarity.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Michelle, you had a question?
One of my questions was on question number 12, the answer to that. And it said that the council would consider whether to accept or deny the developer's plan if JJ was passed. But if Measure JJ gets passed, then you really, it should say you will, that you can't consider it because it wouldn't be in compliance with Measure JJ. So that seemed to be a conflict for me. If you want to put up number 12, I'll show you exactly what I mean there. And I think that's really ambiguous. The other thing was someone mentioned about the Baylands having to do fair share funding from the Baylands for transportation. And I want to know where that fair share funding comes from, because that was not brought up in all of the talks that we did about the financials for the Baylands. Who pays for that fair share funding from the Baylands for area-wide transportation improvements? I brought this up several times that once we went to housing, it crosses a line where the public is now responsible for infrastructure rather than the developer. And that definitely speaks to it when you talk about fair share funding from the Baylands for regional transportation, because the amount of extra traffic will be creating. Right here it says, if that were to occur, the City Council will consider whether to deny UPC's pending application because they would not be consistent with Measure JJ. There should be no consideration about it, because if we pass Measure JJ, then UPC's pending applications would not be consistent and therefore should be denied. There should be no consideration about it. So there's a lot of ambiguity there, and that concerns me. And there's been a lot of ambiguities in the answers that I've heard tonight. And in fact, one of the things that was talked about was local land use control and the MTA funding. You brought up that question. Plan Bay Area 2040, the made-up number in there, the 4,400 units, came directly from UPC's plan. And so what's to say, your question was astute, Madison, but I don't think that it was answered correctly. If the arena numbers come back from the ABAG and the MTA saying Brisbane has to accept 4,400 units of housing, but we've only voted for 2,200 units on the Baylands, but they think we should have 4,400 units. Where are you going to put the other 2,200 units? And that's kind of the conundrum that we're faced with here, because it's obvious that it's being pushed to the Baylands.
Hold on with that one. I'm going to have an attorney address that one, because, you know, MTC and ABAG are not regulatory agencies, but you want to answer that one, Tom? Or
I will defer to Michael. I just want to point out the 4,400 came from the EIR tied to UPC's proposal.
Yes, I'm
Measure
aware.
JJ is a negotiated effort to reduce the number with UPC's involvement, not their approval, but involvement, and they have come to the table to discuss 2,200 units and how it can work. I'll defer to Michael otherwise.
On the Mayor and Council, on the first issue, I think it would have been presumptuous for staff to answer 12 to say that the City Council will deny the application. You know, if the EPC doesn't amend its specific plan, if Measure JJ were passed, we would bring that back. The staff would have a recommendation. Likely, we would recommend that it be denied, but you know, just from a legal standpoint, it would be back for council's consideration. We're not going to put, you know, dogmatically that the council will deny the application. I think that would be presumptuous and on the staff's part to do that. On the second issue, you know, I guess we're assuming that the number comes back on the arena that the obligation is 4,400 units in Brisbane, and what are we going to do with the other 2,000? Well, you know, that would be a dilemma, because there's probably not room to find 2,000 units, you know, in current areas that might be zoned for that purpose. So, again, depending on what the situation would be, if the fact that there would be that 2,000 units would not mean automatically it would go on to the Baylands. That could only be done by a subsequent vote of the people in order to put that number of units there.
Also, the way that they came, that methodology was based on what will the market bear in each city. So it wasn't an actual number given to Brisbane as arena number. It just was in this housing cycle, because we are not giving you an actual number that you need to plan for. We want to assess what will the market bear in each city. And clearly the market is willing to build 4,400 units in Brisbane, and that's why the number is 4,400. But according to Tom, the way that the actual numbers that cities must build are really based upon available land, correct? So in the future, just because they used a certain model to assess what the market will bear is not indicative that that number will be the number that we will get in our next cycle.
Yeah, 2 points. One is exactly right, the denial of, assume Measure JJ passes and it's 2,200 houses. The fact there was an EIR that was based on 4,400, it doesn't say in 828 that the various agencies can go back and say, well, there was an EIR once that said you could do 4,400. That's not built in. So yes, that number's out there. It's out there because of an EIR. If there's a deal reached with UPC and the city approves the negotiations through JJ, then the 4,400 can be brought up in press reports. It can be brought up all over the place, but there's a practical problem for the regional agencies. They have to live with 828, and that looks at the available land. And there are great limits on the Baylands in terms of available land once you get on that landfill. Another factor that keeps coming up is high-speed rail, and what if they put the yard there, the maintenance yard they've talked about, and what does that do to the housing? If they wanted to put it where the housing is proposed to be under Measure JJ, that limits the ability to build the housing on that area. Vote of the people required to move the housing. If they elect to put it on the landfill, then that's a question about remediation of the landfill, which is already built into Measure JJ, but it's also a reflection of the fact that this city council did not deem the landfill eligible to be built, have houses built on it. It doesn't believe it's buildable, at least not currently, even with remediation. Last point, the 4,400 was based on a whole series of factors that have been denied. The city has not agreed to a series of things that would make those workable to build, amenities, infrastructure, changes to roadways, et cetera. Those were not agreed to. I shouldn't say denied. They were not agreed to. And so it's not clear that that the infrastructure would support 4,400 houses, beginning with water, by the way. I don't know where they'd get the water for that, but I could go on.
I don't know where they're going to get the water for 2,200. But one of the other things that you said was that even if Measure JJ passed, that there was no guarantee that there will not be legislative interference. Is that true?
I'm sorry, what did...
You said, even if Measure JJ passes, there is no guarantee there will not be legislative interference. Is that true?
Yeah, it's an absolute guarantee in any legislative environment, not just the United States, that one legislature cannot bind the next. So what you look to is your local legislators, and you work with them to try to gain protections against further interference in their district, and that's what's happened here.
Yeah, it seems to me that we're still, even if we pass Measure J, under a great deal of threat, and there are no guarantees with it, and the situation's changed a great deal. So I did submit a lot of questions to the city clerk that I would like to have answered that haven't been answered adequately yet. And I'd like them to be factual and not speculative, because I think that, things like there's no direct impact but influences, to RENA numbers, etc. It's really obvious to me that there are a lot of influences and a lot of threats made to us over this. And just because we've only approved, if we approve 2,200 units out there, and we don't have available land to locate the other units, what falls by the wayside? Other people look at the Baylands and think there's plenty of land out there for other units. And that still comes into play. And, well, they approved housing for 2,200 units. They're just being stingy. They might as well do it for 4,400 units. We can just stack them twice as high. So you see the dilemmas where I don't really feel that this offers us the protections and the guarantees of protections that have been touted. So I still have a lot of questions, and I really think on this question, Michael, I understand your answer, but if Measure JJ would be the law, correct? Well, then there's no consideration about it, is there? Oh, yeah, catch-22 there. Thank you.
Okay, all right, on the mayor council matters, so countywide assignments and subcommittee reports. We have a list here of So Public Art Advisory Committee, Madison and Karen. I think you had one. Yes, no? You said you
we did.
Okay.
You want to take that?
Yeah, hold on, I'm trying to find that paper that has the description. Okay.
Oh, sure.
Thanks. Oh, yeah, so we had a refresher since this is a new committee. We went over with all the committee members what the Brown Act is, how it applies, best practices, and making sure that you don't violate the Brown Act. We also had Friends of the Brisbane Library representative Wendy Toll came to talk to us about what they're going to be doing in terms of a donor wall at the library. There will be an artistic component to that, so we're kind of hoping to coordinate with them so that, you know, the piece is tasteful and is, you know, just fits in with the library, but they haven't really kind of decided exactly what that donor wall is going to look like. Presumably it's going to be a collection of tiles that come together to make San Bruno Mountain with people's names etched into this tile or represented on the tile in some way. But they're kind of still working that out.
Okay, Economic Development Subcommittee, Madison and Cliff.
Yeah, we had a good meeting. You know, one of the things that was really interesting was to see. I guess it's called Phase 3. It used to be called Genesis.
No, the company's name is Phase 3. Genesis was the building, I think.
Okay, all right. So yeah, so they're very excited about potentially building this biotech campus that would have an open area to the bay, have a public cafe, public restaurant, gym. So
Conference rooms.
yes, yeah. So yeah, that seems to be the new style of these campuses where you know, before it used to be very insular. No one you know comes in, no one gets out, you know, type of situation. Now it's opening up and having the public engage, and instead of having one large company, they're proposing a model that's more like an incubator style, or, you know, smaller companies working within the campus. And then one of the other things that's really cool is they want to put the parking garage below the building. So maybe you might have remembered the previous renditions where it had this giant parking garage along the 101. That's going away. So you will not see that. The parking's going to be below. And yeah, it's a pretty neat concept. I believe they've shown their renditions to the Planning Commission.
I think they've been before the Planning Commission.
Okay, yeah, so.
They're also planning,
Anything else, Madison?
Oh, they're also planning to extend the Bay Trail.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Right, and then they should be done, I think it was 2022, 2021, 2022, I think, ready for occupancy at that time. So they will be biotech companies that come in there because of they design labs. So they only develop for those types of businesses. And this project will significantly trigger the public arts ordinance. So we could have a lot more money coming into the fund for more public art, which we're going to be seeing coming in at Sierra Point soon. So we may see a lot more pieces in that area because of this new development.
Okay, Public Information Technology Subcommittee, Madison and Terry.
Actually, it was Madison and me.
Yeah.
Okay, typo.
Oh, well. We were discussing with Michael the civility policy and social media policy that we were thinking about, and we decided that we would bring that back to council for recommendation in January.
Okay, Airport Noise Subcommittee, Madison and Terry.
Just on all the subcommittees.
So you do?
Yeah, that's right.
Do you want me to go with this one?
Sure, I'll follow up.
So I'm going to probably coordinate this with the Airport Noise SFO Roundtable Subcommittee that I attended last night. But Councilmember Davis and I met with the public, and we invited Sue Degree and Mike O'Neill from Pacifica, and then also had Ann Schneider from Millbrae, and we discussed some of the common issues that we have with airport noise and how we might be able to influence the SFO Roundtable directly, and also the city and county airport and the FAA, and ways that we can do that with a common goal and common agenda items. I think it went very well. We came up with a small strategy of first steps, and we actually, when I attended the airport roundtable noise meeting last night, we were able to implement some of those strategies.
Great.
And actually get the agenda changed for the future, where we will have certain topics that are repeating topics that the public will be able to comment on because they're a standing agenda item, and we can go through how we've progressed on some of those topics. Basically, we added a departures topic, a arrivals topic, and a ground-based noise topic. One of the good outcomes of that was, or bad, depending on how you look at it, I became one of the members of a subcommittee
Oh, man.
for ground-based noise. We have yet to really discuss what that is going to entail, how far off the ground-based noise and backblast is going to be. We need to work on that, but there's 7 of us, including Supervisor Pine, that is going to be on that to work on basically North County issues, which are considered ground-based. And then there will probably be some overlap how departure noise plays into that, and where we decide if it's the first 15 feet that the airport has control over before they pass it off, and what those noise parameters will be.
So is there a separate, there's one for departures and arrivals also?
Not yet.
Okay, so just ground.
There's only an ad hoc subcommittee for ground-based noise, and we have yet to determine what those parameters are.
Because I was
But
like,
we
how
have-
would you get on ground-based? I would think it would be departures,
Well,
but
we're considering ground-based noise is until they get to their cruising altitude.
Okay, great.
Basically. So it's very possible that some of those issues will be for our departures, and, you know, where the ports are and where the noise is coming from. And part of that was because backblast, we have yet to decide, and we will do this in subcommittee, what we're considering backblast. If that is once the airplane's past you and you're getting the reverberation, is that going to be included? So it's an interesting group, and we'll see how it works. But it's basically the North County, and so it's Millbrae, represented from Millbrae, Burlingame, Hillsborough, and San Bruno, and Pacifica, and Brisbane. So we'll see how that works out. We have yet to decide on a date and time and how often we're going to meet, but we'll see how that works. But I think that it was a good strategy to get other jurisdictions working with us to be able to sort of direct perhaps how some of these meetings go without getting too involved.
we also talked about the noise monitor thresholds. And that was a really big topic of the meeting, and so it was great. It really helped to have other council members there because it just brought forward ideas that we hadn't thought of. And so we're kind of taking an approach on how we can get those thresholds lower. I think that the standard is like what is 55 and they're at 65 or something. So we have quite a few in Brisbane that are above the standard threshold, and in order to be at say 65 threshold, you actually have to have like a waiver. I think or there has to, be a reason why something is increased. And for many of the noise monitors, there doesn't seem to be, a waiver that was established to justify moving the noise threshold up. So we're trying to hold the FAA accountable and ensure that we are reporting accurately what the situation is like in Brisbane.
One of the other things that the group discussed was common issues, and we actually got 2 or 3 of them discussed at last night's roundtable. Besides just the agenda, we had agreed that the available reporting on the website only showed 7 days of video, and it used to be 4 months. We got a response by putting it forward from the airport, from Bert, and they are going to make it available for 6 months on the website. We did a couple things that, actually came to fruition. One thing that did happen in the airport meeting itself was that the chair asked and staff asked that direct questions should come through the representative for that city. In that case, that is me, for Brisbane, and so that the staff can direct their agenda items and their responses through the committee member. And I think the entire group agreed that agenda items should be initiated by the representative from that city and not initiated by the public. So I do reach out to the members of Brisbane, or the citizens of Brisbane, and ask them to contact me if they have a specific item that they want discussed. I certainly don't have all the technical information, but I will work as the conduit to bring those issues directly to the committee so that we can get them on the agenda and get them discussed.
I got a question, Terry. Right as I was leaving, Bert was supposed to provide better snapshots of what's happening. I mean, his reports were it's like these bizarre, items, like who was the worst at a certain time and who's the best. It was just, it didn't really apply to what people were being impacted by, airplane noise. So does he provide better analysis that we can track and see are improvements occurring?
That depends on who you're talking to and what you're looking for in a report. In theory, Bert is hoping that, this one-page report, and I'm holding up a blank piece of paper basically, is going to answer all the questions and give you all the data. And so they've been playing with different formats and giving different information, and that's not the be-all, end-all to each person, because different people have different ideas of what should be in that report. But the airport has been willing to try to tweak the director's report to be able to give information that is understandable, and it should be something that anybody can look at. But we're still working on what goes in those reports and whether it really describes the on-the-ground and in-the-air impacts to a community. But I think they are trying to look at it a little differently, and because we're not completely constrained by looking at just the initiative, we need to, the roundtable wants to start addressing specific other items in a way that address community concerns and try to get some results.
Mhm.
So it's a hard question to answer, but we are working on it, and hopefully we'll have some movement. One good thing is the FAA for the second time came to us. Again, they had to be the pre-asked questions, and they did a little bit better job asking the questions. We still have a learning curve, but the FAA representatives that came this time did go back and address some of the concerns that were asked last month when we had such a bad
Yeah.
reaction to, well, you didn't ask the question right, so the answer is no. So we've learned we need to ask it, can we do this? And if we can't do this, is there something you can recommend where we can do it that will help us? So you have to ask an open-ended question to get a response, or it'll just be no. And so we're still working on that, and they have to be in 30 days in advance. So the roundtable has asked each city to give a list of 4 or 5 or 6 things that are important to that city so that we can start targeting the questions to what's important to our city. And I am assured that our citizens group will provide me with those several items that they want me to look at directly.
Oh, yeah, they will.
And then on a separate note, I attended the local policymakers group, which deals with Caltrain and high-speed rail. Caltrain is looking at doing a 2040 business plan, and they want to do it from the future back and say, where do we want our services to be in 2040, and work their business plan backwards to say, what do we need to do now, and to get to that point, what kind of infrastructure, what kind of service levels, and what kind of growth they're looking at. One of the things that came up was all the cities on the Caltrain service line are currently having growth, and many of them are underserved by Caltrains. We're one of the lowest served, lowest ridership, and lowest trains, stops on the Caltrain line. And, that's self-fulfilling. If you don't have any trains stopping there, you're not going to have any people getting on it or off. And so that's something that all the cities have concerns on, and how we deal with that is going to look different depending on what happens with growth at around our Caltrain station, which is affected by San Francisco and by the Baylands. So that's something to look forward to in the next year that we work on that business plan. We also had a report from high-speed rail, and they are still looking at late 2019 for their EIR, and they did say that they met with the cities for Caltrain electrification, and they did meet with Brisbane over the last month, and that they are expecting to have a new plan and map coming out sometime in November with track alignment or track alignments, depending on how you read the wording, but they should be coming out with that sometime in November. I think that's it for me.
I've got one. I'll be quick. I can see that
Be
look
real
on your
quick,
face.
please.
Okay, so I attended the JPA Library Board meeting down in Half Moon Bay, and I am really pleased to say if you haven't been to the Half Moon Bay Library, you need to go take a look at it. And everybody who's working on the local Brisbane Library, we should truck them all down there for a meeting. They said they'd be happy to do a private tour. Just some of the artistic things that they did at that library are stunning. And I was gobsmacked, and I think everybody should go take a look at it. It was great. It was awesome.
Okay, thank you.
I'm done.
All right, city council meeting schedule. Everybody okay with that? All right, good.
Mr.
All
Mayor,
right,
just
Rick-
to highlight, because you always like to have me highlight
wanna
any
talk about it?
changes. I don't really want to talk about it, but just, January 3rd, I added as a canceled meeting right after the holidays. So that's the only change from the last time you saw this.
Good idea. All right, great. Written communications, we had 5. So oral communications, number 2. Do you want to address the council on anything? Yeah, I Thank you. All right. Meeting adjourned, huh? Yeah.
Yeah.
Go home.